I'll use this one. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Frederic. And I have to apologize. First, because I know I'm standing between you and a cocktail, and this is always a challenge. But also because I'm going to drive you outside of the Med to the Atlantic. And I hope that you enjoy the topic that we chose, which is the result of actually 2 expeditions that we do to the Azores, where I had the privilege to be the expedition leader of those and also the chief scientist. And I'll tell you a little bit about the results of these expeditions. Of course, this is a joint effort. So lots of authors. I don't have time to name them all, but we all know how this goes. So big expeditions require lots of effort, lots of people coming in. And the reason why we are investing in the Azores, and in particular in this region, is because we know there are problems. We know there are problems with the management of the world's oceans. We know that only a very small percentage of this ocean is protected. And we know there are a number of activities, human activities, that are impacting the oceans as never before. And so there is a sense of urgency, and we need to come together in order to be able to overcome these challenges. And we try to simplify a very complex issue into three types of solutions. So the first one is clear. We need to save what's left, because there's not too much left, and I'll show you. The second one is also a little bit clear, is that we have the obligation to recover what we have degraded, because that's the good news about the ocean. The ocean recovers. If we allow it to do it, we are able to get back the bounty of before. And the third thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that all activities in the oceans are sustainable. And this is the big challenge, of course, because as we know, our current economic model, our current model of development is based on activities which are extractive, most of them, and most of them destroy nature. And so this is what scientists are telling us. Even in the oceans, only around 30% of the oceans remain wild. And this is the challenge we have ahead. And this is very far from what people understand. People still think that the ocean is infinite, the ocean takes it all, but this is not true. Science is clear, and the message should resonate to all of us. So we at the Oceano Azul Foundation, we have launched this program called Blue Azores with the regional government and also with the Wade Foundation, where we have a common vision, which is to protect, promote, and value the blue natural capital of our ocean. So protect means conservation, promote means education, and value means economy, but an economy which is compatible with the natural values of the ocean. We have set a number of objectives with the Azores regional government, which were really forward-looking. So protecting a large percentage of the Azores EEZ is a big responsibility. The EEZ of the Azores is 1 million square kilometers. So by protecting 15% of there, we are protecting 5% of the European EEZ. We have a lot of MPAs in place as anywhere else, but they don't have management plans. They don't work properly, so we need to put them to work. And special plans are critical in order to make all activities sustainable. And then, of course, there is the big elephant in the middle of the room everywhere, which is fisheries management. And finally, we have come up with also an education program and a bioeconomy program. So it's a very encompassing type of approach where we try to bring all these things together. So this is the big target. In 3 years, the Azores government is going to declare 15% of their EEZ as fully protected MPAs. And for that, we have to bring lots of capacity to the region. We have to bring lots of capacity and lots of knowledge. The Azores is a very special place. It's a big area, as I've said before. It's very deep. And its protection in the areas is still low. But we know that it's very important from both a biodiversity and I would say from a geodiversity point of view as well. So from hydrothermal vent fields to deep sea species to many coastal areas. And we have many yet unknowns, and I'll show you a couple in a minute. So we come up with this expedition where we partner with many different institutions. So in 2016, we had an expedition with the Wade Foundation Plan B boat. In 2018, we expanded a lot. So we had a former codfish, which is now used for expeditions, Santa Maria Manuela, a Navy ship, Gago Coutinho, where we had the ROV LUSU from the Extension of Continental Shelf test group. And we had the chance that actually Latalant was in the region when we found something special that I will tell you about. And so we partnered also with his friends to explore the deep ocean in the Azores. So the numbers are not going to go through them, but just to give you an overview of the effort that was put. The first expedition was in the water for 2 weeks. The second expedition for 3 weeks, except the mapping, which took a month and a half. And so as you can see, lots of effort, lots of different tools that we can use to explore these waters. And I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the things that we have done. So starting by seabed mapping, this is the map of the areas that have already been done with multi-beam in the Portuguese waters. As you can see, there's still lots of blanks out there. We contributed with 21,000 square kilometers, but you don't even see them if I had to point it in that map. And so, but for some areas, it's very important. For instance, this is 2 of the islands on the western group of the Azores, Flores and Corvo, and this was not mapped before. So now we have a perception for the public, which is very important, that as the previous presentation was showing clearly, that the mountains are just the tips of all these big areas, so the territory is much bigger than people think, and they have in their minds. In coastal areas, we explored everything from the intertidal zones, and intertidal in particular in the Azores is quite interesting, because in some of areas you can find these. I don't know if you can guess what this animal is, but these are dusky groupers, one of the most endangered animals in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic, and they are very abundant in these tide pools. The problem is that people use these tide pools because they want to use them as swimming pools as well. So we have conflicts, and having this type of information allows us to then come up with solutions. We also explored the benthic communities, and we have a full assessment of the different islands and some of the seamounts in the region, where we can find the affinities between the fauna that are there, but also the cases where we have special situations where there is very distinct. For instance, some of the seamounts were very distinct in terms of the benthic communities. Same with fish. So in terms of fish, we found out that the general biomass in the Azores is not very different on average of what we found in other Atlantic islands, meaning that they are overexploited. And so we have to come up with solutions. We can also see that in some areas where protection has been implemented, for instance, the one on the right, which is Formigas Bank, biodiversity is much higher. So we have much more biomass in the water. Again, protection works. The ocean is able to rebound if we allow it, if we have concrete actions in place. And by going through the different islands and having these assessments, you can also pinpoint exactly in each island where do you find more or less fish, and then you cross that with the activities that occur on these waters. In some cases, you can also take advantage of having so much people around and so much effort to do specific studies. One we did with this emblematic fish, which is the dusky grouper, as you know, is an endangered fish by IUCN. And we put acoustic transmitters in this grouper, which show us, after 2 months, they are completely territorial. They don't move. So if we want to put conservation strategies for this species, we know what we need to do. We need to put conservation in place and don't move those areas around, because otherwise the groupers will not be protected. So we know, and we have the links now, we know that they are in the intertidal. We know that also that adults will stay around, and they will, and that's, by the way, that's a voluntary marine reserve, one of the few that I know that exists in the world, in one of the smallest islands in Portugal, which is Corvo. And they decided to protect this area because they realized that there was a natural value there in protecting this species right close to the island. Then we found out also, and this was not known, that by using these cameras, some of the islands are very important as shark nurseries. So these are small hammerhead sharks that come near the islands during the summer. And so there are still unknowns about how they get there, if those are breeding areas as well, or just nurturing areas. So lots of things to be seen. We also use these cameras in deeper waters, in mesophotic reefs, where you also can then assess the different species that occur on these mesophotic reefs, which usually are not protected by conservation measures because they are in between the areas where divers don't go, but it's too shallow for ROVs or other types of equipments. So they are much less studied than both the shallow waters and the deep sea. We also use these cameras in the open water, and this is a fantastic opportunity to try to understand what is out there. So these cameras will float for a number of hours, and they have bait, so the animals are attracted to the bait, and you are able to assess what are the value of those waters through time. So these are what we call mid-water communities, and then we can try to understand how they relate in the different islands. We use some innovative tools by our colleagues from the Azores University. They come up with this collar with a satellite tag for studying devil rays. And so what you see there on the right is a dive by a devil ray to 400 meters, although these animals can go to 2,000 meters. So it's an amazing experience. This is on that seamount, which is protected. In the summer, you can see things like this. And this is a small clip showing you a diver that is going to place this collar on the devil rays because they are always swimming forward. And so if they have a collar, this is a non-invasive tagging technique that after some hours, the collar will just go away and the tag will float to the surface. And the animal, as you can see, almost doesn't know that they have something that they are dragging. Okay, so this was this is a technique that our colleagues in the Azores are perfecting, and they are using widely now. In terms of seabirds, the Azores is also a hotspot of biodiversity. So lots of species are nesting there, and some of the big colonies in the Atlantic are being found in the Azores. So you use these ships as vessels of opportunities as well, so that the observers can be there and register the occurrence of these types of species. The same happens with the open water communities, where the Azores is a magnet for life, as you know, particularly to marine mammals, such as sperm whales or rhizo dolphins or many other species that more than 20 species of marine mammals are known to occur in the Azores. And then we found this. So we don't know yet, science doesn't know what this means. We don't know what these animals are talking about with each other, but they are for sure. They have the largest brain on the planet. So it's very unhumble to us to try to think that they are not smart. And they gather like this. So there is some indication that some of these animals are family members, females and calves for sure, but also it looks like some of the females can be related. And so they gather and they talk to each other or do, I don't know, whatever they do when scientists are not around. But again, this also shows the capacity or the lack of knowledge that we still have in studying the largest animals that are on this planet. And the Azores is, again, a prime territory to do this. National Geographic, that partner with us, has these specific cameras that have been to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Again, they are deep-water cameras with bait, with a high-definition video that then can film seamounts at any depth. And you can just send the cameras down, they stay around, they film, they stop, they film, they stop. After 5 or 6 hours, they pop out. You find them with the satellite, you go and collect them, and then you have an assessment, an easy way to try to do these type of assessments in the deep sea as well, to find out that seamount over there is one seamount west of Flores called Cachalot. It was not ever assessed before. So this is the first time that we have images of what's down there. A big part of this expedition in 2018 was the deep water work by the Azores team, the extension of continental shelf group, and a number of other scientists. And so there were a number of dives done right in the mid-Atlantic ridge. So as you know, the Azores, we have a trijunction, so there are 3 plates coming together there, the American plate, the Eurasian plate, and the African plate. And so this is very close to that particular area. And what we found is amazing. So several of these species are new to science, almost for sure. They are still being analyzed. Some of these Paragorgia have more than 1 meter in height, meaning that they are, well, at least a century old, probably more than that. And this is a video where you can show you the ridge itself. So on the left you have the American plate. On the right you have the Eurasian area. So these are the types of environments that you can find there in the deep sea, where almost anything is known. So these are probably the first images ever to be done in this very rich area, both from biology but also from a geological point of view. And so again, we use these platforms to try to increase knowledge. One major discovery during this expedition, done with the hydrographic ship and the ROV, was a new hydrothermal vent field. The shallowest one in the deep water found in the Azores, 570 meters. That is currently also being, we are currently publishing the results of these analyses, both from the microbiology point of view, the geochemistry of fluids, the geology of this area. It's a very rich area in iron, so it looks like there's lots of connection between also these seamounts and the upper layers with productivity being driven by the fact that you have these areas over there. So to conclude, these expeditions allow us not only to promote science, but also it's very important to give solutions to decision makers. So what we do after this is that we produce these science reports, but these science reports come together with a number of recommendations for action. And we can synthesize, there is a long list, let's say, but we can synthesize these recommendations in 4 things. One, which is absolutely critical, is that we cannot spend 30 more years to protect 5% of the ocean. That's not a possibility. So we have to upscale a lot the protection, and we have to really protect, because many times we call MPA things which are not marine protected areas. They are just areas where we try to manage all the conflicts, and that's what we should do in the whole ocean. So in marine protected areas, we should protect nature. And so full protection needs to be scaled up, and this is a mandatory thing for all of us. Then, of course, there are many areas already in place. So there have been lots and lots of effort, lots of processes involving stakeholders, etc., but they are not working. So we should put them to work. It's not difficult. It's just a matter of leadership. It's just a matter of bringing science to the management, to knowledge-based decision-making. And then, of course, fisheries need to become sustainable. We cannot continue to do fisheries as we are today. You know, pelagic longlines, for instance, are extracting 70% of the capture is pelagic sharks. But what they are targeting, in theory, is billfish. So there is a mismatch between what we are supposed to be doing and what we are doing in reality, because there is no more billfish in the ocean in terms of abundance. And so we are targeting the best next thing, and we are selling these sharks for pennies. And actually, there is a whole industry of diving now relying on sharks, which are worth millions. And so we have choices. And these choices doesn't mean that we have to stop things. It just means that we have to do things in a much clever way. And finally, we truly believe that this will only change if we can come up with both literacy for decision makers, for instance, in the first place, but also with economic solutions. So we have to make sure that these activities that are being developed are sustainable, and the old way of doing things really go away, because this is where brought us to where we are today, which is a very, very dire situation for the ocean and a very, very high urgency to act. We have a chance to do that. Next year in Lisbon, we will host the UN Ocean Conference. This is going to be a landmark conference that comes in a year which is also unique, because we have lots of processes where things are being discussed in terms of ocean conservation. We have the CBD, we have the IUCN Congress, we have the COP, climate COP in Chile. And so we hope that with these types of solutions, we can come up to the target that is really on the table right now, which is that we should fully or strongly protect the 30% of the ocean by 2030. So this is the so-called 30 by 30 target that we are pursuing in trying to bring to these decision-making bodies so that they can pass this legislation in fact, and we can make these areas really effective in protecting biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Hello. I have a practical question. So, assuming that we will be able to preserve 15% of the Azorean EEZ, how are we enforcing protection?
Well, the good news is that we have technology. And so enforcement of these areas, it's very different to enforce an area near shore than it is to enforce an area offshore. And we know the problems are different, and so the strategies should be different. But now we have technology, in fact, and we are using that technology already in many ocean nations to effectively protect the ocean. Of course, we need means, so we need to have capacity to reach out to areas when there is transgression, but it's very easy now to understand the behavior of fishing boats, for instance, in the ocean, through artificial intelligence algorithms that are using the positioning of the ships, the behavior of the ships, to understand exactly what they are doing. There is this platform called Global Fishing Watch, which is doing exactly that. And so, again, it's a matter of bringing these technologies to the policy arena and making them useful to the decision makers, so that they can understand and they can know exactly what's going on in their ocean. Because some years ago we didn't have this capacity, and so it would be very difficult to have. For instance, now there is this, as you know, this UN Ocean Agreement that is being discussed about the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, and one of the topics that comes again and again is how are we going to protect areas in the high seas? Well, it's not difficult. We have the technology to do that. We can pursue ships which are wrongdoing. We have the flags of the ship. We have the ports where the ships are coming to. And so, if we know that there is a suspicion that something happens in the ocean, there are ways. Of course, there are legal things that needs to come to the table as well, but we have the tools. There is no excuse for us not to do things right anymore, I would say.
Hello, thank you for the very interesting presentation and beautiful presentation. Beside the expedition, I was just wondering if you have some information or even perception on climate-related effects, climate-related changes in the area, and eventually what are your recommendations for this issue? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, it's true. These biodiversity crises that we are living are within the context of a climate crisis, which makes things much more challenging. One of those challenges is how do you connect these areas? So I would say two things. One is that we need to think big, so small areas don't work. We need to think large-scale areas, and we need to think about connectivity. So we need to make sure that there are corridors that animals can move from one area to the area to another and still be protected. Because we know that there is this phenomenon, this migration to the poles. So the tropicalization, if you want, of the temperate seas is a reality. We are seeing this in Portugal. More and more species coming from the Mediterranean and North Africa to Portugal. And so we have to think at the scale of the ocean rather than thinking at the scale of each country individually. And so this is one aspect. The second aspect is that the ocean can be really helpful in fighting climate, in fact. So if we protect, for instance, coastal areas, we are protecting areas which are very, very efficient in blue carbon, in extracting carbon from the atmosphere, for instance, and in putting the carbon in a non-available form, either by biomass or by integrating in the sediments. And so, again, by having a strategy that protects these habitats, we are at the same time fighting climate in a way, as with forests on land, because there is lots of capacity for the ocean ecosystems to incorporate carbon as well. If we, on top of this, if we rebuild the biomass for the 1950 levels, we have plenty more organisms with more carbon also on them that will help as well. Of course, this all depends on us moving away from our fossil fuel society, because we cannot only fight climate by adapting, we have to fight climate by stopping putting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
Other questions? I was interested in listening about your plan of 30%, and I was interested by listening to your plan of 30% by 30. But how is that going to fit within the window of opportunity that we have of only, I think, 10 or 12 years before everything unravels completely?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say again that we have to work in the different routes. So we have to fight the climate crisis, but we have to fight the biodiversity crisis. Because, you know, and I tell this to my students a lot, it doesn't matter how much the climate is going to change if we don't have life. If we don't have life, we will not be here, you know, to see the end of this fight. So we need to fight this at the same time. So we need to make sure that we transition to a circular economy and we decarbonize the economy at the same time that we save what's left and we rebuild nature. Because rebuilding nature also will help in lowering the levels of available carbon in the atmosphere, and this will help, of course, us fighting the climate crisis. So the two things are completely linked, in my opinion.
One last question. That's okay. Merci.
Thank you very much.
Merci.